What does it mean to be normal? The character traits or circumstances of birth that first pop into your mind when trying to articulate what a normal person looks like are learned from somewhere or someone, and in Chainsaw Man, that idea is no different. Across the entire series, one character stands out as having what I believe to be the most significant impact in the trajectory of not only Denji's life, but the entire nature of Chainsaw Man as a series. My name is Josh, I'm the host of Beyond Media, and this is how Reze revolutionized Chainsaw Man. The status of Denji is probably our most important thing that we need to take a look at before we can introduce Reze to our analysis. Season 1 leaves Denji off in a really interesting place because he's on the cusp of learning how much he doesn't know. A lot of Denji's early existence revolves around the idea of a lack of normalcy. He lives a life outside of what is reasonably relatable and strives for what he considers to be normal. On the mellow hierarchy of needs, Denji ends Season 1 around right here, just creeping up into the 3rd level. But what's interesting to note is that Denji perceives himself to be all the way up toward the top. Scenes like the one where he's ruminating on Himeno's death or talking about how all he needs to be happy are basic things indicate that Denji believes he's got all he really needs because he more or less has access to the prospect of everything he wants. But the first time that we see that crack is after his date with Makima. I have 2 videos up, one better made than the other that revolves around this chapter, so for this video, let's go ahead and skip toward the end where Denji asks, quote, "Miss Makima, do you think I have a heart?" Makima then places her head on his chest and confirms that he does have one, following with Denji's realization and acceptance of that fact. This scene is really interesting because it harkens back to the one I mentioned previously where Denji was ruminating on Himeno's death, where he wonders if the reason he can't grieve her is because he lost his human heart when he became Chainsaw Man. The subtextual implication of these scenes, I think, is really important because the question is actually quite layered. Assuming that Denji links the idea of having a physical heart to the ability to emotionally process love and grieve like Aki does, the question placed here after having an emotional experience related to love provides insight into Denji's thought process. The question Denji is truly asking here is, can I have that kind of love and connection? The type that he saw and made him cry in the film that the two just watched. Supporting this read of the heart question is the beginning of the next chapter, where Denji gives charity not inherently because he understands the full emotional identity of his humanity, but because he believes he's allowed to participate in acts of empathy and connection, at least at a purely physical level. He realizes that there is much more above what he believes he's at on the hierarchy of needs. And it's not a mistake that this tender realization is where we are introduced to Reze, a girl about Denji's age that is about to break open both Denji's worldview and her own sense of desire. Initially presented as happenstance, Reze meets Denji hiding from the rain and the two share a small moment where Denji does this. Right. Anyway, she invites him to the cafe she works at and he follows, insisting he's only there to get his thank you. But it's clear to both Denji and the audience that Reze is quite obviously trying to get in good with Denji, flirting with him on their second encounter when Denji goes back to see her again. But it's here that we see the first crack in their facade, when the topic of school comes up and Reze finds out that Denji isn't in school. While painfully obvious to us as the audience, we know that Denji has gone from abnormal life to abnormal life. Normalcy is not something that he has really ever experienced, and so he doesn't really know how to differentiate that from what he thinks he knows. But here, with the mention of schooling, the idea that Denji is doing something truly abnormal is introduced to him. As far as Denji and the audience knows, Reze is that idea of normalcy, a regular girl who works part-time and studies for school, a girl Denji's age who actually seems to like him and enjoys spending time with him. Reze is a series presenting the facade of normal to Denji, introducing him to ideas that he never thought of and things he's never known. This is seen very strongly in their trip to the school at night, where Reze takes on the type of educator dynamic more fully, both in the classroom and in the pool. And in the classroom, the two exchange some dialogue, and Reze says, quote, "You've never really gone to school, Denji? Not even grade school? Isn't that kinda, bad? More like messed up. At 16, you're just a kid, It's when most kids are studying to get into college or throwing themselves into a club or sport, hanging out with friends. But you're killing devils, almost getting yourself killed. Is this public safety place you're with right now a good place?" Denji then replies with, quote, "Yeah, they're super great. I get 3 meals a day and I get to sleep in a bed." Once again, this is highlighting Denji's mental framework, of course, between desire and need, because to him, the two have largely been exactly the same thing. Of course, Reze, presenting normalcy to the audience, replies back to him saying, quote, "That's like the bare minimum of standard living in Japan. It's not something amazing." This idea is immediately reinforced in the pool scene. Denji doesn't know how to swim, but Reze is going to teach him. She is the one that is going to break open that next level of need and show him that there is more to life.
私は全部
Directly following this, Reze asks a question to Denji this time, saying, quote, "Hey Denji, which would you choose, the town mouse or the country mouse?" To which Denji answers that he'd rather be the town mouse. As is mentioned in the story, this is a reference to the Aesop fable titled The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. The story follows a city mouse going to visit his friend in the country, and upon seeing how the country mouse lives his life, it takes him to the city to show him what life really looks like, where service, great food, and fun are abundant, an entire world that the town mouse really never had seen. But scared off by a great danger and fearing for their life, the country mouse ends up leaving to enjoy his peaceful life out in the country, saying goodbye to the city. A few different characters are given an opportunity to shed light on which they think they are and who they perceive others to be. Angel identifies himself as a country mouse and Aki as a city mouse. Once again, this highlights Denji's state of mind, showing us where he's at in terms of worldview. His logic for picking the city mouse is access to better food and more fun, whereas Reze insists that nothing is better than a simple peace. A fable like this being introduced to the story is interesting because there's an implication that there is a type of interpretation that enhances its place in the narrative. Are the characters in Chainsaw Man placeholders for the characters of the fable, or is it more like context for context, or maybe subtext for subtext? I've seen a couple Reddit threads here or there that read the story as Denji being a stand-in for the country mouse, Reze being the city mouse, and Makima being the great danger. That read would make sense, as Reze is the one that is going to, quote, teach Denji everything. Some people believe that maybe Makima is the city mouse and Reze and Denji are both country mice, but I have a different read that I'll get into in a second. However, what I find more interesting even above trying to apply Chainsaw Man's narrative to the fable is the actual dynamic at play. Another thing that's going on here is the idea of perspective between the town mouse and the country mouse. Both get a small opportunity to show each other what their lives are like, and by the end of each interaction, both leave each other's respective worlds. What I find interesting about that is that the moral of the story is that the simple life is preferable to one where you are always living in danger, and that contentment is far more important than endless desire for anything else. However, both are presented as each individual character's sense of normalcy. When the city mouse explains danger, it's simply part of its everyday life, in the same way that lack of abundance or luxury is a normality within the country mouse's world. There is a subtle idea that normalcy isn't exactly what the other thinks it is, and that idea, maybe more than the others, holds true to Chainsaw Man's narrative. While Reze pretends to be the bringer of normalcy to Denji's life, the truth is that her own origin is just as, if not sadder than his was, being trained up as a Soviet weapon. The truth is harder at the end of the arc when Reze confesses that she's never been to school either. Even within Denji's own life, the idea of normalcy is all dependent on perspective, and each normal comes with its own advantages and disadvantages. And that's what I really believe opens up the fable to being integrated stronger into the story, but we'll have to hold off on that for a second. Following the pool scene, Denji and Reze go to the festival where they talk about his life once again, and Reze asks Denji to run away with her. Now, despite what Denji says here and his best efforts, he is falling into affection with Reze, and it's hard to really blame him. While Makima introduced the idea of love into Denji's life, it was a primal and maternal kind, albeit a bit Freudian in nature. But with Reze, there's something more. She provides him a very small, barely detectable presentation of choice. The idea that, just maybe, there is something beyond what he's experienced thus far. After the two kiss, of course, she betrays him, biting out his tongue and attempting to steal Denji's heart before Beam intervenes. And it's there that the idea of Denji's heart emerges back as a primary literary device. It's interesting because we know that the idiom of having a heart is almost never used literally, and yet because of both how the characters identify it and how Makima interacts with it, the concept of having a heart and the physical reality are muddled together. Stealing the chainsaw heart is something that a lot of this series revolves around, and everyone seems to want it, and that includes Reze. She begins to hunt him while Beam, Aki, and a few other members of public safety try to keep Denji away from her, but in chapter 46 she catches up to them. And although barely just waking up, Denji rises to speak with her. This is the moment where I truly believe he starts to realize there's more above his base level of existence because he makes a realization. Quote, "While I was in so much pain I thought I might die, in the back of my confused brain I thought about things real hard and I realized something. Every woman I meet tries to murder me. Everyone's after my chainsaw heart, but what about my heart? Denji's. Does nobody want that?" I think from here on out, it's clear that Denji wants himself to be desired or loved beyond just the idea of someone loving him. It's a greater realization previously non-existent within his psyche. As the two continue to fight, Denji is able to take her underwater and subdue her, even rescuing her life. The two then have a conversation on the beach, wherein Denji offers to run away with her, even offering a second time, telling her that if she wants to run away with him, he'll be waiting at the cafe she worked at, though she claims she never had any feelings for him at all. But I think that for most, it's quite clear that this is a fib. The discourse on whether or not Reze loved Denji is an interesting one, but I feel that for most, they agree that she did foster some form of romantic interest in Denji. Everything we've talked about thus far from Denji's POV, with Reze offering him normalcy and the option for something more than hardship and struggle, can be applied to her. Denji is thematically Reze's Reze. Let's take a look back at how Denji and Reze's fight ended in the water. Reze is weak here. She is at a significant disadvantage when wet and submerged. If Denji was able to even moderately keep up and survive on equal footing, then this is a place where he is on top of the power dynamic. If that's the case, why does Reze strip down and enter the pool during the school visit first? There is no reason for her to openly put herself in such a vulnerable position. She's unclothed, meaning she cannot hide away a knife or a weapon to ambush him with. She is in the water, actively giving physical power to Denji. While it's easy to talk about how Reze tempts normalcy or something more in this life, the same is true the other way around. The scene in the pool is an escape for her, a chance for the two of them to both grasp at something pure and normal in the tragic world that they live in. Reze, knowing she's on a mission to kill him, and yet still sharing this moment, is an act of joyful mourning, a dance in the rain while she waits for the inevitable storm. We see this happen again when she's choking out the man who was working for Tornado. As she sings, her frail voice dampens all other sounds, the patter of the rain, the sound of the night, and the choking of the man who is dying in her arms. She dares not even close her eyes as she just escapes into the song, as she carves out a tiny piece of normalcy, protecting just this night with Denji, even if it cannot last. Hearing herself referred to as cheese or bait in relation to Denji is painful because she knows that's what Denji is to her, the temptation. The idea that Denji, a living person, is no more than a pretty idea meant to ultimately wound her. And that's all that this person identifies her as, and maybe even more tragically, she knows it herself. Because Reze longs not just for the idea of Denji, but also, eventually, for Denji himself. And even though she said she never had any feelings for him, in the very next chapter she attempts to make it there only to be intercepted by Makima. Makima is an interesting case for this arc because she really is non-existent within it after the cinema scene. Even still, her fingerprints are looming over every single detail and interaction, holding Reze back from her true desires of running away with Denji and a simple life where they can go to school. Makima's first words upon her appearance here are, quote, "Me too. I like the country mouse too." Knowing what's coming, Reze tries her best to fight only to be hit by Angel. Makima then helps her down as she stares at Denji, confessing that she'd never been to school either. Reze's true nature as a character is one that parallels a lot of the exact heart that Denji has been seeking this entire time. Beautifully tragic due to the inevitability her death was, and yet even in that short time what she did for the story was beautiful. She opened up a whole world for Denji by giving him choice, by showing him there is so much more to live for than just scraping by on survival. Without her involvement in the plot, Chainsaw Man isn't allowed to dive into deeper and grittier theme dynamics of love, desire, and the need to be human. Without Reze, Denji cannot be Denji. That is how Reze revolutionized Chainsaw Man. But that's not all there is left to discuss, because I do believe that its true meaning is wrapped up in the fable presented earlier. Makima's callback to the idea of country mice closes the loop on the narrative idea for the time being, though I believe it's reopened much later on in the series. For now, let's get into the mud and try to identify what this fable has to do with Reze's story and how it impacts our characters. Firstly, I'd like to say that I think this is mainly allegorical in nature, so let's go through and identify which characters' ideas relate to each other. Denji is the easiest to mark, and I believe he is the country mouse, a being who has long existed without and has grown accustomed to the lack of luxury in life, characterized by not having rather than having. Next is the city mouse, who I believe is Makima, and also the city's architect. While that may be a relatively simple idea, there are other reads that interpret Reze as the city mouse and Makima as the threat to both mice. However, I am not so convinced. The revelation that Reze's upbringing was equally, if not more so abnormal as Denji, reads to me as Fujimoto distinguishing her from the experienced city mouse who has access to the expendable luxury to teach other people. She can pretend and imitate like she does when she studies or teaches in the school, but ultimately doesn't play that clean part in the narrative. Makima, on the other hand, up to this point, is the person who actively provides Denji with opportunities for luxury, first with Aki and power, and now with Reze. But the analysis doesn't stop there. The human danger, or the cat in the fable, I believe is a stand-in for heartache, personal loss, or emotional tragedy, and I'll explain why in a second. But Reze, I believe, isn't meant to be any of them. Instead, Reze is the food that the country mouse gets to eat in the city. She is the fun and the experience and the understanding of what is possible when you're willing to risk danger. This idea is hinted at very subtly by the man who attacks her in chapter 43. Reze demands to know who he is, and he replies, quote, "Funny question, do you even know who you are? I know who you are. You're the cheese to lure the mouse into the open." In other words, the bait. When you think about Reze's role in the story, it's really to open Denji's heart to the idea of romantic connection with an equal untainted by maternal desire. And really, she's the first crack we see in Denji's deepening heart, and what allows him to more seamlessly connect with Aki and Power. But what's even more interesting is what the country mouse does when danger is finally introduced. Because the country mouse, even in the wake of previous abundance, runs. In order to get really deep into this, we're going to need to enter spoilers for chapters 80 to 83. If you're not caught up in the manga and want to read unspoiled, this is your chance to leave, and thank you so much for spending your time here. I hope that movie was as beautiful for you as it was for me. In chapter 80, Denji is reeling from having killed Aki, a character who spiritually is fulfilling the role of the food dynamic in Aesop's fable, and while in his own personal depression, Makima appears, ready to mold him into whatever she wants. At the end of that chapter, still suffering from the pain and loss of Aki, Denji replies to Makima's promise to grant any wish with a simple request. Quote, "A dog. I wanna be your dog." This line is devastatingly multi-layered and calls back to several different moments, but for the reader of the fable, I believe this is where Reze being the stand-in for the cheese in the arc and the human danger being emotional tragedy really shines. After seeing and understanding how much pain that being human, loving, and enjoying connection can be after Aki's death, Denji tries to run away. If he becomes a dog, he does not need to feel the fear and pain of emotional tragedy. If he does not have access to the food, the city, and the fun, then Denji does not need to fear the looming threat of losing it all at once. Reze, Aki, and Power altogether are the fun and the food and the city. Makima is the mouse that forces the country mouse to partake, and devastation that emerges after losing that enjoyment is the human threat that proves as a constant danger to all those who dare living to partake of the food. This read of the fable in relation to Chainsaw Man becomes even more chilling when Makima talks about her plan to take this small country mouse and bring him into the city, saying, quote, "I asked myself how I could break that contract. How could I make you so hurt that you no longer be capable of living a normal life? So damaged that you never be able to bounce back for as long as you live? Quite the challenge, isn't it? After all, you felt plenty of happiness living in extreme poverty with Pochita. So I decided to begin by making you a lot happier. I gave you a job and money and fed you lots of delicious foods. I provided a family that would get along with you. Aki became your good big brother and Power your bratty little sister. I'd make that level of happiness your new normal. Then I would destroy the whole thing." And that idea oozes out of the Bomb Devil arc, maybe more than any other arc in the entire series. The country mouse runs away, the way Denji wants to go back to being a dog, afraid of what it might cost to live in a place where fun and food are abundant. And so, what does that mean for us? Where does that leave the story of Chainsaw Man? Well, I believe Fujimoto is slipping the moral of the fable. Like I talked about in the last video, over and over again in the story, we are shown beautiful instances of resilience in the wake of this horrible world. We see Denji choosing to live a world with pain and bad movies just so he's able to maintain the love that he has for others, even if that love opens him up to absolutely awful pain. I believe Chainsaw Man and the Reze arc is telling us something very precious. Love, life, connections, and relationships are worth the risk of danger. They are the good movies that shine against the bad, the memories that stay with us, and the things that make us human. That looming impossible threat, and in many instances inevitable pain and loss, are worth the beautiful cherished moments of love and connection with others. That part of being human, that part is worth it. If you enjoyed this video, you might like the one you can check out here, and I hope that one day, for one reason or another, you find your way to a beautiful and a peaceful city. And until next time, keep dreaming.